To our Zoomers, thank you and welcome. We are excited about today's Lunch and Learn. As you know, if you were here last month, we have officially hit 1 year of the program. So it's really amazing that we've had awesome faculty, staff, and alumni here to present their research and their knowledge with all of you. So thank you to those retroactively and in the future, and to all of you here learning about that. So my name is Sarah McKenney. I'm the Director of Alumni Relations here at NSU. I'm joined by my team, Renee Johnson, my Associate Director, and Emily Lopez-Martin, my Assistant Director here working on Zoom. Thanks again for joining us as we talk about today's session, Evidence-Based Practices to Support Students with Autism in Education. Remember, this is truly a lunch and learn. So thank you for still eating, for continuing to eat, getting ready for more. The discussion will continue. Our Lunch and Learn series, as I mentioned, does highlight the expertise of NSU faculty and alumni who are advancing research and practice that supports student success. So what a great conversation today will be. That's an example of that work in action. Before we begin, and someone who will be gratefully introducing our speakers, I'd like to introduce Dr. Emmy Morales. She's an NSU alumna from the class of 2012 and serves as assistant chair and assistant professor in the Abraham S. Fischler College of Education and School of Criminal Justice. A doctoral level board certified behavior analyst, Dr. Morales' work focuses on applying behavior analysis in educational settings and preparing future professionals in the field. And as I mentioned, Dr. Morales will be introducing our featured speakers this afternoon. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Morales.
Thank you, Sarah, for a lovely introduction there. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Emmy Morales-Pierre, and today I have the privilege of introducing our speakers. And so we have Dr. Maribel Del Rio Roberts. She is an associate professor within the Department of Human Services at the Abraham S. Fischler College of Education and School of Criminal Justice here at NSU. She is the faculty lead for the Master of Science in Developmental Disabilities and faculty administrator for the Access Plus program. Dr. Del Rio Roberts is a licensed psychologist with expertise in childhood and adolescence, autism and developmental disorders, psychological evaluation, and parenting issues. She has extensive experience providing consultation and training on a variety of topics, including child development, providing guidance for parents on supporting educational and virtual learning, stress management for parents, parenting children with diverse needs, and other prominent parenting issues. She has conducted research in the areas of early intervention in autism spectrum disorders, parenting, employability skills for young adults with autism, the relationship between bullying in students with autism, and emotional wellness, among other research. Dr. Del Rio Roberts also serves as an autism consultant in the community and provides trainings to many different groups. She has served as a consultant on television and radio on issues related to developmental disabilities and child mental health. She is a volunteer clinical director for the Strong Minds program of Special Olympics Florida. Dr. Del Rio Roberts was selected as the 2021-2022 FCE-SCJ Distinguished Professor. She is passionate about advocating for issues related to disability and special needs, education, and legislation that affects women and children. Our second speaker we have is Dr. Alex Lopes. Dr. Alex Lopes is an award-winning educator, school leader, and nationally recognized advocate for early childhood special education and inclusion. He serves as director of the Bodwin Preschool, Starting Right, and the Academy at NSU, where he leads multidisciplinary teams supporting young children with autism and their families through comprehensive early intervention programs. With more than 20 years in education, Dr. Lopes has held leadership roles in two of the largest school districts in the United States, Miami-Dade County Public Schools and Broward County Public Schools. That's where he oversaw large-scale pre-kindergarten programs for students with disabilities and led cross-functional teams of educators, specialists, and community partners. He began his career as a classroom teacher of preschool children with autism an experience that continues to ground his leadership in empathy, practice, and a deep belief in every child's potential. Dr. Lopes was named Florida Teacher of the Year by the Florida Department of Education and went on to become a National Teacher of the Year finalist through the Council of Chief State School Officers. A published author and frequent speaker, his work focuses on early intervention, inclusive systems, culturally responsive practice, and the power of education to transform lives. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome our speakers for this afternoon, Dr. Del Rio Roberts and Dr. Alex Lopes.
Good afternoon. Thank you all for joining us today. We're going to talk a little bit about autism spectrum disorder in the context of the educational system. And how can we as educators, families, supporters of people that may be on the spectrum be able to really understand what are some of the supports that they may benefit from, and what are some of the things that we can do or we can help advocate for some of our students. So we're going to start off, and I started off, most of my interest in autism came from my personal experience being the sibling of an older I have an older sister on the spectrum, so pretty severely affected. It's nonverbal, and has a lot of the classical autism features that you would expect. And growing up, my interest was always in helping others identify, and especially how it presented in girls and women. And so a lot of my early work, and still some of my interest, is in the early identification of autism spectrum disorders. And I find that providing parents with that knowledge and that roadmap is really, really helpful. But as I went along, I also realized that there is all of our young children grow up to be young adults and older adults, and that there was a huge critical gap in terms of supporting young adults that are transitioning into the higher education realm. And so I want to talk to you all a little bit today about what are some of the supports that can, I don't think it's clicking. No, that's sure. There we go. Okay. That some of our students can benefit from. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about what are some of the overall best practices, specifically how it relates to potential comprehensive support programs within a university setting. And I'm going to talk a little bit about our Access Plus program here at NSU. So just to start off, we'll talk a little bit about some of the characteristics of autism spectrum disorder and how that may present itself, or some of the challenges or differences that we may see in a student in higher education that may be on the spectrum. So first and foremost, one of the main areas in which many individuals on the spectrum are impacted are deficits in communication. Not necessarily only expressive or receptive communication, but social communication. And that social communication is a huge factor, especially for a lot of our students in higher ed, that honestly creates some of the larger challenges or bigger challenges for them. So many of our students here at NSU, they are admitted and at other universities in higher education, hopefully based on their own academic merits, pursuing different areas of study that they are academically and cognitively capable of engaging or pursuing. However, many of our students here are verbally fluent. So they do speak in sentences. They all generally speak in sentences and may be actually very articulate in their communication. However, some of the challenges that we may see are difficulties when it comes to reciprocal social communication. So they can easily communicate maybe their thoughts, especially as it may pertain to their interests, but they may have more challenges engaging in a back and forth conversation. So as we know, if we have challenges engaging in a reciprocal back and forth conversation, that may present challenges when it comes to making friends, especially when the structure isn't set up anymore as it is maybe in the K through 12 system, where you're automatically assigned to sit at tables or work in groups. So making those connections can become a lot more challenging for a lot of our students. Or also communicating and advocating for our needs to our faculty, to our professors, to advisors. That can also present some challenges as a result of social communication differences. Staying on topic. This is a huge one. I've spoken to many faculty over the years that will ask me for support on how to manage a student that is really interested and invested in the class and wants to ask lots of questions, but they almost monopolize the entire class because they want to ask 25 questions and go on and on talking about their specific topic of interest. And so they want to nurture that and they want to encourage that, but at the same time, want to give other students the opportunity to participate as well. And then difficulty sustaining appropriate eye contact, or using other gestures appropriately, either inconsistent use of eye contact, that sometimes or more often is the case, but not always. Many of our students, and it is a misnomer that people on the spectrum always avoid eye contact. That is not true. Many people on the spectrum actually can make eye contact. Sometimes it's too much eye contact, it's the regulation of eye contact, or they are masking, they are pretending, and it's very effortful for them to make eye contact, but they can do it. Some other difficulties that we may see may be difficulties reading social cues, interrupting professors to ask questions when it's not the appropriate time, but they really are so eager to want to know that information that they sometimes have a hard time with inhibition. They may not realize that other students, they may be interfering with other students' ability to participate or to focus. Maybe they have, maybe they might hum to themselves out loud or have, tap on their desk repetitively and may not realize that that might be disrupting other students. Working in group projects can be a challenge. They may either become really engaged and want to take over because things have to be exactly the way that they envision them and they want them to be, or they completely withdraw and they have a hard time and then they really don't kind of seek out or participate in those group dynamics as well. They may try to befriend the professor or maybe address the professor informally, more informally that they should. They may appear overly nervous when asking questions. Again, they may not be really sure what to say because there are some difficulties reading social cues. And a lot of times they're fearful of asking questions or asking for support. So the professors will say, well, this student is failing the class, but they do really well on the test, but they just don't, or there's this particular thing they don't understand, but they're afraid to ask questions. They don't feel confident in asking questions or going to office hours and things like that. Then we have the area of restricted repetitive behaviors. So many people, so we have the social communication domain that looks at that social emotional reciprocity, and we talked about how that may look in the university setting. We talked a little bit about the nonverbals, and then we have another establishing appropriate relationships. And then we have a whole nother area that people on the spectrum tend to be to present differences in, and that is these restrictive repetitive behaviors. For our students, or for students typically in higher education, that may present itself as potentially asking excessive questions about a topic of interest. So they really want to know every detail, everything there is, and they may spend an excessive amount of time looking at videos, researching, talking about, even in conversation, they tend to go back to that particular topic. They may have difficulty transitioning from one topic to another. And they may appear stuck, and the professors may be trying to move on and they consistently may bring it back to that particular topic. Difficulty understanding vague or abstract concepts. This is really important because this is a lot of times when people think about autism and they think about restricted repetitive behaviors, they think about the overt observable behaviors. But there is cognitive rigidity that comes along or that is present in people with autism. And so it's that cognitive inflexibility that you tend to see more of. So that means I need you to be really specific and tell me exactly what you expect of me. Because if I don't know exactly what you expect of me, when and how to do it, that's going to make me very anxious. So I'm going to get stuck on that. And until I get sufficient clarification to know what I need to do, I'm going to kind of consistently seek that out, which can be sometimes overwhelming for some. They can appear distracted or preoccupied during class. They may be kind of wandering off and thinking about their own interests and that tendency to hyper focus on their interests. And they may need to engage in self-stimulating behavior. We don't see that as often in the higher education setting, but we have had students that at times do need to engage in motor stims. That whether that may be a little bit of finger flicking, hand flapping, rocking back and forth. A lot of times students, by the time they get to our setting, have learned to compensate and maybe utilize a fidget toy or something else. But there are instances in which, they may need to do that, and other students and even faculty may not know exactly or understand why the student might be displaying that behavior. There are other associated features of autism spectrum disorder, and it's important to clarify that autism is now considered a spectrum. So it used to be that we used to have 3 separate diagnoses. We used to have autistic disorder, Asperger's disorder, and pervasive developmental disorder not otherwise specified. So people that were but when they revised our diagnostic manual, which is our current diagnostic manual, is the DSM-5. They looked at the criteria for those 3 diagnoses and they said, it's really all the same differences, but criteria, but in varying levels of impact of how it impacts the person. So they consolidated all 3. So we no longer diagnose people with Asperger's or autistic disorder or PDD-NOS. They consolidated it into autism spectrum disorder. So it is now a spectrum, and we qualify that by level 1, level 2, or level 3. People that were previously what we used to consider more classically on the spectrum or diagnosed with autistic disorder were those that had limited language, some cognitive delays, needed a lot of support in their day-to-day living, and generally more limited social response. They are now ASD level 3. Those individuals that had fluent language to communicate, they had at least an average IQ or above, but they had these social communication differences. They couldn't pick up on the social cues. They couldn't engage they were awkward in reciprocal conversation, the avoidance of eye contact, really hyper-focused interest. They used to be Asperger's, the diagnosis of Asperger's, they are now ASD level 1. And if you weren't quite as impacted as level 3, not quite as functional as level 1, they are now level 2, which used to be PDD-NOS. So that gives you a little bit of context. All of our students at NSU are level 1 students when they are, most of them when they are admitted to the university. But so we do tend to see other associated features, meaning other things that get in the way that aren't necessarily unique to being on the spectrum, but they do cause challenges for them. So for example, they tend to have what we call splinter skills. So they have really developed skills in one area. Sometimes you see people that have really well-developed rote memories, or they can perform really complex mathematical operations, but they can't balance a bank account, or they really can't manage learning to drive. So there's a real gap and a lot of times it's in some certain cognitive tasks compared to their adaptive or daily living tasks. Difficulties with focus and concentration are often also an associated feature, meaning they're often present. When those difficulties are really, really significant, sometimes you see some people have a co-occurring diagnosis of autism spectrum and ADHD. But those, typically for them to have both, it has to be pretty prominent. Sensory reactivity, sensory issues. So that's usually part of the criteria. You may see either sensory avoidance, where they are, there's some sort of avoidance of certain loud sounds, pitch, volume, type of sound, tactile, certain textures of foods. That's why many of our people on the spectrum are very picky eaters. A lot of times those are sensory related issues. And then we also have other things like certain fabrics and things like that. They may have auditory processing difficulties as well, and difficulties with what we call executive functioning, planning, organization, time management, things like that. Okay. So I'll talk a little bit about sensory differences, but just so to get a sense of how that would look in the classroom in an academic, higher education setting. You know, certain bright colors, the fluorescent lighting can be really overwhelming. You know, they may have to look at things from an angle. There's a visual component to visual sensory seeking behaviors. Certain typical classroom sounds could be perceived as painful. Just moving desks across, or somebody, you know, pushing their chair out. And they may not be able to filter out extraneous sounds. Motor skills can also sometimes be affected in terms of fine motor skills, writing. So a lot of times they need a little bit of extra time, and they seek out accommodations through our Student Disability Services Center to get some of that. And then their learning styles, you know, are going to vary based on their cognitive strengths and weaknesses. Some are visual learners, some are more verbally inclined. And so, you know, and long-term memory oftentimes tends to be pretty well developed. In terms of coping styles, individuals with ASD frequently describe themselves with dealing with a lot of anxiety and stress. What happens? You're navigating a world where you're engaging with mostly neurotypical individuals, and this world isn't always so accommodating to people with differences. And so I'm getting these cues that I'm not saying the right thing, I'm not doing the right thing, I'm overstimulated sensorially, I don't have any friends. What happens? You start to feel anxious. And a lot of times there's a lot of anxiety. And eventually, sometimes what happens when you're so overwhelmed with anxiety for such a long time, you don't know what to do differently, then that can lead to hopelessness and depression as well. So it does tend to co-occur often. So I wanted to talk a little bit about, just to kind of give you a little bit more of a heads up. This is a much longer presentation than I have a lot of time for, but there are lots of different accommodations. Oftentimes, we utilize providing, for example, to accommodate and support our students, letting them have extra time, depending if they need a little more time to process certain types of information, or if they're easily distracted. Providing structured study guides so they know exactly what information I need to focus on, because otherwise it can become overwhelming for them. Giving them a little bit more time to process. So when you ask them a question, rather than providing a three-sentence prompt when you're asking them, chunking the information into shorter bits and giving them a little bit more time to answer. That also is helpful. And then, you know, there are other supports with social skills, but I'm going to talk about these as I mentioned, because I only have a few minutes left. I want to talk about our Access Plus program that we have here at the university. It is a unique program. It is the only one of its kind here in South Florida. I think the only other one in Florida is in North Florida, and it isn't as comprehensive. And it is a on-campus support program to support students at NSU that are on the autism spectrum. We do provide them with, so we talked about some of their challenges or the differences that they may present with, so we try to provide them with some supports to ensure that they can be as successful as possible during their time here at NSU. So we help them, we set up a study hall where they are paired with peer mentors that are other students here at NSU, that will help them with things like planning ahead and saying, okay, I have an exam, a paper, and this presentation due this week. A lot of times that can be really overwhelming for a student. So let's break it down. Let's figure out in your schedule, what time are you going to work on this week? When are you going to study for your exam? Just helping them to plan their week and allot some of that time management, that can be really helpful. Communication and advocacy. A lot of our students feel very overwhelmed or intimidated asking their professors for their extra time or to take their test at the testing center where there's less distractions. So we either empower them we always try to empower them first to help them reach out, whether it's in person or help them write an email. But if that's still too overwhelming, then oftentimes, the program staff will help to reach out to the faculty and in conjunction with disability services to also facilitate that communication as well. We have offered social skills groups. We offer opportunities for them to engage with one another. Career development. This is really the next step of furthering the connection. Is they graduate from our university, they get their degrees, but they don't have as much experience and those soft skills to be competitive, right, in the workforce. So how can we help give them a little bit to even the playing field? So helping them augment that as well. We try to focus on that and overall wellness and coordination of services. So these are some of the different areas that we provide, as I mentioned. And then we also use technology and other things to help us facilitate that process. This is a use of an avatar that you helped incorporate to help them practice interviewing skills. And we have an actor that actually is portraying, is behind that avatar and will interview them so that they have a little bit more of a heads up or an advantage. They feel more comfortable when they're going into that interview setting. And then, of course, university-wide collaboration with advisors, with, housing, with families. Most of course, our students are adults, so they have to consent for us to communicate with their families, but most of the time they all do so and are encourage us to do that. And then we also collaborate with multiple departments here at the university. So that's it for me. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Del Rio Roberts. One thing I forgot to mention at the top was that we're gonna save questions until the end. So there will be a question and answer portion like there normally is. But if we'll wait till Dr. Lopes finishes and then we'll go around and ask those questions that were presented via Zoom and those in the room. So Dr. Lopes.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I have decided to structure my presentation on a theoretical framework that was created by Brenner. He was a developmental psychologist, and he believed that in order for us to understand development, we need to focus not only on the child, but also on all the environments, all the systems that affect that child's development. So our plan today is to go and talk about the child, but also we're going to understand all the systems or environments that have an effect on that child. So of course we start with the child. We have to get to know the child. What are the child's preferences, the likes, the dislikes? And we use the likes, we use what they like the most to motivate them to learn. And whatever they dislike, when we prepare the environment, we try our best to get rid of it. So the reinforcers, what they like, how are we going to get them to do what we want them to do? And then their communication profile. We want their child to be able to express their wants and needs to us. So it could be a picture exchange communication system. It could be a communication board. or it could be a voice output communication device. When I was in the classroom, Brandon, one of my students, came to me when he was 3 years old. He was fluent in 3 languages. He could speak and write in all those languages. The thing he liked the most, his biggest reinforcer, were his crayons. He didn't have a pincer grasp, but with a palm grasp, he could draw the most amazing drawings. And they had to do with the activities that we were doing in the classroom. And you could see movement in those pictures. What he did not like, he didn't like transitions. He didn't like any changes in the schedule. And one day, we found out the hard way something else that he disliked. So we had these big books, and before we read them, we would cover the text, and we would get the children to volunteer words. It was a way for us to encourage language. And then one day, out of nowhere, we're in the middle of this activity, and then Brendan becomes very aggressive. It starts to shout, comes at us, starts to hit us, trying to bite us. And we're like, but what triggered this behavior? Okay. We had to dig a little bit. We had misspelled the word. So the other thing that Brendan disliked, he dislikes misspellings. At the time, we didn't carry these powerful computers that we carry in our pockets today. But we had something better than that. We had Brendan. So whenever we were in doubt on how to spell a word, we would just ask for his assistance. We have covered the child, and now we're going to talk about the microsystem. The microsystem is any environment where the child is actively participating. It could be the classroom, it could be the home, it could be a child care facility, it could be a therapy place. For the purpose of this presentation, we're going to talk about the platform. So we structure our environment, and we use a universal design for learning. So we know the likes and dislikes of our students, and we use everything they like to promote learning. And we try to remove from the environment everything that may trigger a challenging behavior and prevent them from learning. We use predictable and consistent routines. Consistency is key. How do we do that? We have the plan, do, review, which is exactly how I've structured this presentation. In the beginning, I showed you guys what the plan is. The plan is for us to talk about the child and understand each one of the environments. Now I am taking you through that plan, and when we reach the end of this presentation, we're going to review. This is key for our students. When you think about Maslow, and you think about the hierarchy of needs, the first thing a child needs in order to learn is to be well-fed and not to be sleepy. The next most important thing is for them to feel safe. And this predictability, organization, structure makes an individual with autism feel safe and ready to learn. And we have clear expectations. So whenever we have any of our routines, we have the plan to review, and we also review our classroom roles. We support transitions and behaviors with systems and visuals to accompany those systems. So we have a first then board. Under the first, we put what we want the child to do. It's a teacher preferred activity. And then we put something that the child really enjoys doing. So it's to motivate them to do what they need to do in order to learn. We also use a choice board. And a lot of times we trick them. The choices are all ours, but we give them the choice of selecting something that we have already chosen for them. And a lot of times it works. We have individualized picture schedules to help them transition. This tells them when to do things. And we also have a task analysis where we break a task into multiple subtasks in order for them to learn. This one in particular is for washing hands. So we show them when to do something. We also show them how to do it. And we have the zone of proximal development. So this is a concept created by Vygotsky, another developmental psychologist. He believed that individuals learn through social interactions, and that's what we do with our students. He also called those aids, those assistants, kind of like a scaffold. So think about when we are building a building, the scaffold is there, and we remove it little by little when the building is ready and ready to stand on its own. So that's what we do with our prompt hierarchy. We start with physical support, and we go through the entire hierarchy, verbal, until the child is able to do it independently. This is a task analysis that I used to use in my classroom on how to get somebody's attention. When I was a teacher, I taught in an inclusive setting, and it was important for me to teach all of my students with and without autism with consistency. Again, consistency is key. How to get somebody's attention. You tap them on the shoulder, you say their name, you look at them, and then the fourth square, throughout the year, we kept switching it. It started with say hello. Then it moved on to my turn. And finally, throughout the end of the year, it was come play with me. I used this in my classroom. And one day I was playing on the carpet with my students when I felt a touch on my shoulder, and a voice saying, Alice, Alice. Clearly, the child was trying to say my name, Alex, but I did not recognize the voice. It was the voice of a child, but it was a voice that I had never heard before. So I turned, and when I turned, it was Jason, who had been with me for a year and a half, and who had never said a word. And the first word he said was my name. I couldn't help myself, and I shed a tear. To this day, I don't know what he was trying to tell me, because I was inconsistent with my emotions. And because I shed a tear, I scared him, and he started to cry compulsively. Anyway, after that, we were able to interact, but I still don't know what he wanted to tell me that. We have covered the microsystem, the classroom, and we're going to move on to the mesosystem. The mesosystem is where all the microsystems interact. So this is where the classroom interacts with the home environment, or the classroom with a therapist, or the home with the child care facility. For the purpose of this presentation, we're going to talk about the interactions between the school and the home. And we make them as consistent as possible. We have an open policy when it comes to communication. We have the daily home notes. The front of the home note is for us to tell the families how the day of the child was at school, and the back of the note is for the families to let us know anything that they think is important for us to know that happened at home. We collaborate with our families when we build our individualized education plans or our behavior plans. And again, consistency is key. In order to do that, it's important, I believe it's important to have cultural reciprocity. And I had the pleasure to study with Beth Harry, who created the process at the University of Miami. Dr. Harry used to say that in order for you to be ready to work with families, you need to become aware of your own cultural biases. And believe me, we are cultural beings, social beings. We all have our biases. And that is okay. What is not okay is for us not to be aware of those biases and to act on them. That is why it's so important for us to self-reflect, find out who we are so that we can policy ourselves and we don't allow ourselves to act based on our biases. Once you do that, You're ready to understand the family, the cultural priorities of the family. Finally, you acknowledge and you respect the differences between your culture, and the culture of the family. And then, and only then, you are ready to collaborate and find shared solutions. Karine was the mother of one of my students. And that student stayed with me for 3 years. And I always had the impression that Karine didn't take the education of her child seriously. Because whenever I needed to talk to her, she would laugh, she would smile, and I was like, hmm. Then one day, I threw a party and I invited the immediate family of all of my students. And Karine showed up with all four of her boys. All of them were on the spectrum. And I had a carpet in my classroom with a design. And the four, from the oldest to the youngest, started to play on the design. And they were so happy. And I looked at Karine, and she was smiling. And that's when I realized it's not that she was not taking it seriously. That was my bias, because I was raised to, if you're talking about something that's serious, you take it seriously. You don't laugh, right? She took it so seriously that she embraced autism as the culture of her family. She taught me a lesson. We have covered the mesosystem, and now we're going to move on to the exosystem. And the exosystem has nothing to do with the child directly, but it impacts the child indirectly. And this could be the extended family of the child. This could be the congregation, the church congregation of the family. This is also, and for the purpose of this presentation, is the administration of the school. All administrative decisions impact what happens in the classroom. The child study meetings that we have once the children have left school really impact what's going to happen to them, the goals we have for them, the strategies, how we're going to address their needs. The training that we as administrators decide we're going to provide to our staff members and to family members, and then how we allocate our resources. We have covered the exosystem, and now we reach the final system according to Bronfenbrenner, the macro system. And this is the country, the global culture that encompasses everything that is done in this country. We have Public Law 94-142, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, on which we have to base what we do. It's the law that governs special education. We have all the policies that come from the Department of Education, from the Florida Department of Education, and we have the cultural expectations of anybody who lives in this country. With this slide, I have chosen to share with you what I believe to be the American dream. And I have chosen this because I honestly believe that everybody in this country, with or without a disability, deserves their American dream. And I have been so fortunate to still be living my American dream. And the day I realized I was in the classroom, and in the classroom, whenever they played the Star Spangled Banner, we had a video on TV, right? And then when the bombs were bursting in the air, we had fireworks on TV. So one day I was there, and one of my students was on the potty. I had my right hand on my heart, and my left hand was holding his hand, because no matter how much I told him there are no sharks in the toilet, he was not convinced. It was a good thing that we were not at NSU. Seriously. So there I am, right? Then the fireworks go off on the TV screen. And I remember Francis, who was extremely afraid of fireworks. He comes running to me, right? And then he grabs my leg. But I'm telling Alex that there are no sharks. But Francis, just the fact that I was next to him, that he was holding my leg, that was not enough. He said, "Sing, Alex, sing, sing." And there I was, holding somebody's hand, no sharks in the toilet, and the bombs burst in the air. That put a smile on my face. And that's when I realized it was the beginning of my American dream. And it's still alive. And I have been so fortunate, and I'm still very fortunate and humble to serve this community and to be here at NSU. And now we review, just like we do with our students at the Baldwin Preschool. We covered the macro system, and we started with the child. And that's where everything starts. And we keep going back to them. We talked about the classroom, the microsystem. We talked about the interactions between the classroom and the home, and I shared you the lesson that I learned from Corinne. And finally, we spoke about the exosystem and the macro system, and that's when I shared with you my American dream. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. I just forgot the question. Sorry. Okay, time for the Q&A. So I have some on Zoom that I'll read off, and then you guys can prepare here, and then I'll raise your hand, and I'll see if our gracious speakers have the opportunity to answer your questions. If you guys want to come up here and be part of the Zoom, I have a second mic. And I will just not use the mic and pass it to you. So you're here right now, Dr. Del Rio Roberts. I'll hand this one over. And then Dr. Lopes, this one's for you. So the first question that we have on Zoom comes from Sophia. And she asked, what can you do to help infants that are struggling with autism?
It's on? Okay. So we have another program here, Sophia, called the Starting Right program. And the Starting Right program is for any child who has been diagnosed on the spectrum, and the child doesn't come alone. The child comes accompanied by an adult caregiver. It could be the father, the mother, the grandparent, the nanny. It's okay for them to take turns. The goal is for the child and the adult to learn the strategies together.
How do you address social misunderstandings around autism? That comes from Pia.
Okay, so in terms of, and I think that can be interpreted in multiple ways, but I do think that there are a lot of, there's two ways, and I'll briefly address it both. One is misconceptions, common misconceptions. As I mentioned, it is often conceptualized that, and what I hear from a lot of adults on the spectrum is that they themselves they struggle, and intrinsically they have recognized some of the differences that have been presenting challenges for them for many years. But people around them say, "There's no way you're autistic. You talk. There's no way you're on the spectrum. You have a job." And there's a misconception that people think that because someone is verbal and they have a job and maybe even have a family, that they are not on the spectrum. And that is not necessarily the case. And in reality, what we have found is also that, the statistics show that many more boys typically are diagnosed with being on the spectrum. However, some of the research now is showing that many more women in their 20s, 30s, and 40s are being identified as being on the spectrum. Seems like us women, we're a little bit better at masking. We're a little bit better at learning the scripts and kind of figuring out, or it's often attributed to, oh, she's just quirky, or she's anxious, or she's stubborn. And a lot of these differences are dismissed. When it comes to interpersonal miscommunications, oftentimes I think being as clear as and direct as possible in communication is extremely helpful. Not in assuming that the person is going to be able to infer what you mean. Sarcasm, jokes, those things are very challenging for a person on the spectrum. They don't all necessarily get it. They tend to be much more literal. So making sure that, that we can check in for understanding and say, did that make sense, or do you need me to clarify anything for you? And I think that can also help.
Anything to add, Dr. Lopes?
I think going back to my presentation, self-reflect, find out what your biases are, and then make sure that you understand that autism is part of the culture of that other person, and learn to compromise.
Any questions in the room?
Sure. Hi, I have a question. My name is Sandy St. Clair. This is a full circle moment for me. So this is for you, Dr. Lopez. Graduated from here. My son was actually in Bowdoin preschool. We did the starting right. Ryan is now going to be 10. The systems, we went through the pandemic together. You were incredible. You're still incredible. I love all the systems that we learned because we are still in a private school. Ryan is nonverbal. He's saying words. He's fully potty trained. And this school, starting right, Bowdoin, Dr. Lopez, the whole team, just everything that I experienced in the beginning of our autism journey, because you guys were the foundation for my family and I. I mean, even to the little Saturdays we go to the school to do the little, the boards, the before and then, we still use it in his present school. It made a difference. So I just want to say thank you. Continue doing the good work. I have a nonprofit organization because of what I've been through with Ryan, because it was so rough at the beginning. But this school and you being a director, like I said, we've been through a tough time. And even when I came to you with questions, yours answered. And even in the classroom, everything that he's saying, he actually preaches this, he actually did apply to my son. It was the best experience. And today we have a new kid who's just incredible, who is thriving. I just wanted to say thank you.
Thank you. And I hope you celebrate each and every one of his successes. We're humbled, and thank you very much.
Excuse me, this spectrum. I presume that you have certain tests, I mean, to the infant, what type of tests you have and how do you place them?
So we typically, it is very rare that a child, or almost non-existent, that a child under 1 year of age is diagnosed as being on the spectrum. We do try to account for, the natural variation and developmental differences. However, once a child starts, there are expectations that certain social communication milestones need to be met. So most often what parents first recognize is either a language delay. So most children around 1 year old are starting to begin to say single words. By 18 months, there's typically a language explosion, much more words. By 2 years, they should be putting words together, right? So usually somewhere around the age of 18 to 24 months, in more cases in which the child is displaying more symptoms on the spectrum, typically the way that it is diagnosed, and there are the challenge is that there's not really one standardized process, because a parent can take the child to a neurologist. The neurologist will see the child for 10 minutes and say, he's on the spectrum. They can take them to a pediatrician, and a pediatrician may say,
he's on the spectrum, or he's not on the spectrum. I don't agree with that, right? So it depends. But the most comprehensive and most thorough way is to have that child go through a developmental or psychological evaluation. So there's a particular measure that's called the Autism Diagnostic Observation Schedule that is administered to children as young as toddlers, about a year and a half, that looks for certain social communication milestones. So I'm going to engage this child in play to see and interact with them to see how they respond to their caregiver, how they respond to me. What is their response to name like? Do they make eye contact? Are they able to engage in imaginative play? Are they displaying repetitive behaviors? And there's a lot of specific prompts, and it's a measure that you have to get extensive training on to administer. And between that and parent report, typically is the most common way or the most comprehensive way to diagnose very young children. Once they reach the age of 3 and up, depending on how much language and how responsive the child is, we can start to administer more standardized testing. We can administer a cognitive test of IQ to see, okay, maybe this child isn't as verbal, but maybe on visual, spatial tasks, they're really good at solving puzzles, right? And that gives an avenue to show how they can learn. And as they get older, we kind of expand on those tests depending on their age. And honestly, for adults, a lot of times it's based on a very thorough clinical interview where we ask very specific questions. We get input from other people in their life as well to see if, these differences are observed. And that's how we typically will do that.
We're just around out of time, so I think I have time for one more question if there's one in the room. We have one on Zoom. Anyone here have a question? Okay, let me go to Ruth asks if there's any advice for high schoolers, high functioning ASD/Asperger's for managing at college if there is not an ASD program.
Yes. So I would say the first piece of advice I would give is to make sure that they seek out and register with their Office of Student Disability Services at their university. That office typically is who is responsible for reviewing any accommodation requests for potentially extra time, maybe individualized housing if they need a separate, their own room for living accommodations, and ensuring that once those accommodations are granted, that these accommodations are followed up through. So that's one piece. I would say start early, visit different colleges and universities and get a sense of where the student is going to thrive, where they're going to do best, where they feel most comfortable. And I would say just try to have a plan in place ahead of time. So before transitioning, this is what to expect. So we visited the campus. This is where these things happen. Now, let's think through what is your first week of college going to look like and kind of talk through that. I think being able to anticipate ahead of time helps to facilitate the transition much more.
Ruth also wanted to share that her child is a graduate of the Blue School. Say thank you both for taking your time today, and on behalf of the Alumni Association, we have a very small gift to say thank you. Thank you for your wealth of knowledge that you're sharing with us in the room. So we really do appreciate it.